I'd like to start off tonight talking about one of my favorite stories, and it kind of starts or maybe ends with a surfing tournament. How many guys in here surf? Anybody? Okay, so like not a ton of us, but a few of us have been out, gotten wet, gotten in the waves, surfed. Even if you haven't surfed, there's something really impressive when you see pro surfers. And there's this tournament that really is not like any other surf tournament, and it's really not like any other sporting event in the world. And it's called the Eddie Wood Go Surf Tournament. It's a Quicksilver surf tournament. It's in what? Yeah. That's why I said Eddie Would Go. It's a surf tournament they have in Hawaii, in Waimea Bay, on the north shore of Oahu, of the island of Oahu. How many of you guys have been to Hawaii before? Man, a bunch of rich kids in here, all right? Okay, so I've been to Hawaii. If you haven't been, Hawaii is a magical place, okay? It's just like, you just get off the plane, you just relax. It's awesome. And I actually lived in Hawaii for a little bit, on the island of Oahu. And the north shore of Oahu is famous for its surf break. It has Pipeline and Sunset, and really probably the most famous beach in Hawaii is Waimea Bay. And when I went there, my dad was living out there, and I went out to visit him, I don't know, like 10 years ago now. And what's amazing about Waimea Bay is for a lot of the year, especially in the summer, it is just like a bay. It's like totally flat. There's no waves at all. And I was out there kind of snorkeling around, and I had a very trippy experience. I was out there swimming, and all of a sudden I felt something on my leg. And it freaked me out. And it was like a little vibrating, like, and I was like my mind's going through like electric eel, do sharks vibrate? Like, what's happening here? And I was freaking out. And I reached down, scared to death, and I felt in my pocket something vibrating. I pulled out my cell phone, that's right. I had been swimming with my cell phone in my pocket, and I pulled it out, and I was just like, it's freaking out, and this guy on the beach is all, "Can you hear me now?" And it's an old Verizon commercial that you guys like, and I was like so mad, and my phone was like done for the rest of the trip. It was horrible. And anyways, Waimea Bay is not always like that though. In fact, Waimea Bay is the spot for the Eddie Would Go surf tournament, and it's kind of a unique tournament. Like I was telling you guys, they don't have it every year. As a matter of fact, they've only had it 9 times since it first started in 1985. And the reason is because the conditions have to be exactly right for this surf tournament to be on. And the conditions are that the waves must reach consistently in sets 20 feet high, okay? Now 20 feet high is high. I'd guess this ceiling, maybe this beam right here, that's a little bit lower than 20 feet, like a little bit higher than that. Maybe that ceiling fan is about 20 feet high, okay? And but that, in Hawaii, they measure waves from the back. And so a 20-foot wave actually has like a 30-foot or a 40-foot face, okay? So way taller than the top of this building, if you can imagine. And this tournament is invite only, okay? So they invite, I think it's, let me see, I have it actually written down. They invite 28 of the best big wave surfers in the world. You can't go unless you're invited, and they only invite 28 people. And the deal is the tournament is not held on a certain date because they have to wait for the conditions. So it's held anywhere from November 1st to February 28th. And what they do is when the guy who decides that the tournament's going to be on goes, they call you, and you have to get to Hawaii within 24 hours to be in this tournament. So wherever you're in the world, if you're in Australia, if you're in South Africa, if you're in the mainland, you got to fly within 24 hours and get there and get over to Waimea Bay for this surf tournament. And it's really an amazing tournament. They call it the Eddie Would Go tournament. And in fact, in February 25th of this year was the most recent time they had the tournament. They hadn't had it for 7 years before that because the conditions weren't right. And then this year, and you figure, I told you, the last day of the possibility of the tournament is February 28th. So at the very last minute, like on the 25th, they said, let's do this. They called the 28 guys. Everybody flew to Hawaii, and they had the tournament. And I actually have some highlights, a video I want to show you of the Eddie Would Go tournament from this last year, 2016. So you guys want to go ahead and run that video?
Aloha and good morning and welcome to the North Shore of Oahu. Another gigantic swell is detonating across Waimea Bay, preparing for a start for the special Quicksilver in memory of Eddie Aikau.
You guys are all competing against each other, but Eddie would want you guys to help each other.
The energy is electric here on the beach. Feeling the presence of Brock Little.
Wow. And Ross Clark-Jones out in front. Jamie Mitchell going for the barrel.
Then a big drop for Jamie O'Brien as he'll try to hang on.
Here we go, an airdrop out the back. It was John Florence.
Grant Twigg-Baker looks over the ledge. He'll get hung up.
We got all 5 skis running in. This is controlled chaos. It's been a day of heroics, a day of brutality in some cases. Look at that, Mason Ho on a gigantic wave.
Running through this big open face wall, Ross Clark-Jones trying to put himself in a place to win this thing. Wow.
Lost in the foam, who's it gonna be?
That is John Florence, ladies and gentlemen.
Can he come out of the whitewater? He does for a split second, he's still standing.
John Florence is the 2016 Quicksilver in memory of Eddie Aikau champion.
All right. Now, here's what you have to understand about Waimea Bay is that the reason the conditions get like that is very specific. The swell has to be coming at exactly the right direction. So the storm or the wind or whatever's creating the wave has to be coming from blowing exactly the right way. And then what happens is the water goes from really deep into really shallow really fast. And so you get these big, gigantic piece of water that are all of a sudden hitting what ends up being a reef and pushing up and creating this giant wave that comes over. And that reef is what you got to understand is a very sharp coral reef. It all surrounds all around the island of Hawaii. So if you get sucked up into that wave and thrown down, there is a very serious chance of you getting thrown down across that wave. The water that wave is breaking into is very shallow because it changes so fast. And so you're getting thrown down on what could be a razor sharp coral reef. And lots of people have lost their life. In fact, when you go to Waimea Bay today, there's signs all over the place that say, swim at your own risk. That basically, if you get in trouble out there because of the waves, nobody's coming to get you because it's too dangerous for the people coming in to try to get you. And one of the other things that makes this surf tournament interesting is that the vast majority of big wave surfers, they get pulled into waves on jet skis. And that's because you have to get, as a surfer, you have to get going fast enough to be in front of the wave to be able to ride the wave. And it's hard to do that paddling. But in the Eddie Wood Go tournament, you have to paddle. There's no jet skis pulling you in. But you did see all those jet skis there to save you in case you wipe out and to rescue people, right? Okay. That's not my story I want to tell you. I want to tell you the story about why it is called the Eddie Wood Go tournament. And you heard him say it's named in honor of Eddie Aikau. Eddie Aikau was a famous Hawaiian guy. At 31 years old, he joined a bunch of other native Hawaiians on a traditional canoe trip around the islands. They were going to circumnavigate all the Hawaiian islands and go all the way around it. And and not like a modern ship, but in an ancient kind of canoe. And the first day out, after they launched, they started walking out. They canoed out several miles off of the island, and they're trying to kind of navigate with the sun and everything. And a big swell came and tipped over their canoe, and they're in bad shape now. And there's no communications, right? It's all ancient kind of canoe trip, so they don't have any radios or anything like that. And they're just hanging on to the side of this canoe. And Eddie says, "You know what?" He said, "Why don't I take my surfboard and I'll try to paddle into the island, and I'll get help and send them out." And that was the last time anybody ever saw Eddie Aikau. He just paddled out, and a few hours later, the Coast Guard saw the ship and was able to rescue all those guys. But Eddie was never found again. He died 31 years of age, trying to rescue the rest of the guys on the ship. But that is not where the phrase "Eddie would go" came from. Eddie actually was the first lifeguard ever on the North Shore. He's the first guy to ever get paid to be a lifeguard on the North Shore. And Eddie had this attitude that he was going to rescue anybody that got themselves in trouble that was at the beach. And so you see these waves coming in, right? And people, surfers would go out there, and they wouldn't realize how big or how treacherous the conditions were, and they'd be swimming, and they get in trouble, they get wiped out or something. And Eddie, this is back before they have jet skis, right? So you got to remember when this is. Eddie would always go out and try to rescue people. So much so that he actually rescued thousands of people on the North Shore from really dangerous beaches. In times when none of the other lifeguards would go, nobody else was going to come save you. There's signs that say nobody's coming to rescue you. Eddie would go. And that's where the phrase "Eddie would go" comes from. If you ever see it, there's a bumper sticker. They're all over Hawaii, but if you're in surf culture, or you know surfers, you might see Isaiah Lepper at church. He has an "Eddie would go" sticker on the back of his car. It became this amazing slogan of "Eddie would go." And just came for any time that courage was needed, or somebody was in trouble and it was dangerous or treacherous to go save them, people would look at each other and they say, "Eddie would go." And I love that idea. I love that attitude. In fact, his brother, Clyde, you actually saw him in there. He said, because that's what Eddie is all about. He gave his life to save others. He gave his life to save thousands of people at Waimea Bay. He helped people he never knew. He was willing to risk everything in order to help people and rescue people. And there's something I love so much about that kind of attitude. And I think the reason that resonates so much is because I see that attitude in the Bible. So many of the heroes, so many people I look up to in the Bible have that same kind of courage, that same kind of willing to risk everything to go and help people and rescue people and save people. I want to look at the person that maybe most reminds me of this in the Bible, which is the Apostle Paul. And I could probably take several different examples from Paul's life, but we're going to spend almost the entire time tonight in Acts chapter 14. So if you want to turn in your Bible to Acts chapter 14, we're actually going to read the whole thing. I'm going to break it up a little bit and talk about it as we go. But I want to think about the Apostle Paul and the courage that he showed. Acts 14, starting in verse 1. The same thing happened in Iconium. Paul and Barnabas, say Paul and Barnabas. That was weak. Say Paul and Barnabas. Paul and Barnabas went to the Jewish synagogue and preached with such power that a great number of both Jews and Greeks became believers. Some of the Jews, however, spurned God's message and poisoned the minds of the Gentiles against Paul and Barnabas. But the apostles stayed there a long time, preaching boldly about the grace of the Lord. And the Lord proved their message was true by giving them power to do miraculous signs and wonders. But the people of the town were divided in their opinion about them. Some sided with the Jews and some with the apostles. Then a mob of Gentiles and Jews, along with their leaders, decided to attack and stone them. But when the apostles learned of it, they fled to the region of Lycaonia, to a town of Lystra and Derbe and the surrounding areas, and there they preached the good news. Okay, I want to try to break down what's happening here. How many of you guys have ever been on a mission trip? Okay, a few of you guys, and that's pretty normal because there's a lot of young people in here. Usually you kind of like go on mission trips a little bit later in life. If you ask a lot of the adults have been on mission trips. I've been able to go to Africa and Cuba and Mexico and work with people and minister to people and kind of do missions in those places. And a mission trip is where it's different than a vacation. Like, I like to travel too. When I leave here, actually the day after tomorrow, I'm going to Virginia. I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I can't wait. Like, I'm so excited to see the Smithsonian and all that stuff that, like, when you go on your 8th grade trip, if you go, that you're, like, totally bored to do, you don't want to do. Like, I'm like a little kid about it. Like, I'm so excited to go in and, like, just nerd out all day long in the Smithsonian, like the White House and all that kind of stuff. But a mission trip is not like a regular trip. It's not like a travel type trip, right? When you travel, like what I'm going to go do in Washington, D.C. is I'm going to see all the sites, and I'm going to see the Capitol building, I'll see the Washington Monument, I'll see the White House, I'll see the Smithsonian, I'll see Gettysburg. I'm going to do all that kind of touristy type stuff, right? A mission trip is different, though. A mission trip is when you go somewhere specifically to share the gospel or to help people, to serve people in some kind of way. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times you go on a mission trip somewhere, you're not going to the touristy safe places, but a lot of times you're going to very dangerous places. You're going out into places where there's not running water and there's a lot of people who are hurt or sick or people who haven't heard the good news yet or people who are dangerous or whatever the situation is. And so going out to those places is what a mission trip is all about. And so the story here is that Paul and Barnabas are going on a missions trip, and they're going from Israel, which is on the Mediterranean Sea, and they're going up into Greece and in there, and they're what today is modern-day Turkey, and they're sharing the gospel with people who've never heard about Jesus before. They've never heard about Christianity. They don't know that Jesus died and rose again from the dead in order to save their sins. And so they're going there and preaching about the grace and good news of Jesus Christ. The problem is, though, that where they're going is a really dangerous place. And what we find out, it says right there, is that it says, then a mob of Gentiles and Jews, along with their leaders, decided to attack and stone them. And so here these guys are preaching the good news, and then these people are getting crazy and angry about it, and they don't like it, and so they want to attack them and stone them and kill them. They hate the gospel, they hate Jesus, and they certainly hate Paul and Barnabas, so much so that they're willing to kill them. And here's the first point I want you to understand tonight. There are evil forces in this world that hate God and that hate his people. Look, Jesus told us that this was true. There are people in this world that are going to hate you for the simple fact that you're a Christian and you love Jesus. And the reason is because they hate God. And they hate anybody that represents him. John 15:18-21 says, this is Jesus talking, he said, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you are no longer part of the world. If you're a Christian, your citizenship is not in this world. It is in heaven with God. You're not part of this world, so the world rejects you. I chose you to come out of the world, and so the world hates you. Do you remember what I told you? A slave is not greater than the master. What did they do to Jesus? They killed him. They crucified him. They beat him. They mocked him. They scourged him, right? If they did that to Jesus, it says, since they persecuted me, naturally they will persecute you. And if they had listened to me, they would listen to you. They will do all this to you because of me, for they have rejected the one who sent me. So Paul and Barnabas are going out to these dangerous places in the world, and they're sharing the gospel with people, and they're telling people about Jesus, and they're telling people how they can be saved. They're telling them that God loves them, and that God died for them. And if they'll repent and turn to him and believe on Jesus, then they'll be rescued, and they can be born again, and that's the way they can have everlasting life. And the Bible says that as they go out and they're preaching the good news, there's people that are listening to them becoming Christians. They're having their sins washed clean. They're experiencing the forgiveness of God. But there's another thing that happens too. They're getting opposition. There's people that are angry with them. There's people that hate them because of that message. There are people that are going to mock them and make fun of them. You know, there's places in the world today where it's illegal to tell other people about Jesus. In fact, there's a lot of places where it is. You will get thrown into prison for telling people about Jesus, for witnessing, for sharing the gospel with people. There's places today where the legal punishment, the government, if they find out that a Muslim converted to Christianity, the law, like this is not, you do, like if you call the cops, this is what they're going to come do. Like it's not like they're going to come protect you from this. They will put you to death. It is a death penalty. You face a death penalty for converting out of Islam into Christianity. There's places in India where if you convert to Christianity from Hinduism, you will have your house burned down and your whole family put to death. That's happening today in this world, right now. This stuff we're reading about in the Bible, it's not just like, oh yeah, way back then in like the Stone Age or something. Like, that's not what it is. It's still going on. And in our culture, if you convert to Christianity, some of you guys have converted in here from you were an atheist, or you maybe were believed a different religion, you converted to Christianity, or some of you guys have been raised in a Christian home. You're probably not going to face that same kind of persecution of being put to death. But if you live for Jesus, you will experience opposition. You certainly will experience people coming against you. And it might take the form of mocking, or it might take the form of not liking you, or not wanting to hang out with you, or disrespecting you, or something like that. But you certainly, look, you could be kind of undercover Christian, and no, it won't be a problem. Nobody's going to mess with you. But if you really go out there and live for Jesus, you are going to experience opposition still today in this world. And the reason is because there's people out there, there's evil people who hate God. And they hate God inside of you. And so if you're going to walk with God, you can expect opposition. So that's the first thing I want you to understand. Let's go back to the story in Acts 14. Verse 8. While they were at Lystra, Paul and Barnabas came upon a man with crippled feet. He had been that way from birth, so he had never walked, ever in his life. He was sitting and listening as Paul preached. Looking straight at him, Paul realized he had faith to be healed, and so Paul called to him in a loud voice and said, "Stand up!" The man jumped to his feet and started walking. I just want you to imagine that you're Paul and Barnabas right now. You're sharing with people about God. Listen, I just want to tell you, there's a little crowd there. There's people that are listening to you. I want to share with you about Jesus, what he taught, who he is. He loves you. There's a man who was God himself, who came down, who was born of a virgin, who lived his life sinless, who died on the cross to take your place for your sin. He was risen from the dead for new life. And if you turn to him, he will forgive your sins, and he will make you a son or a daughter. And he looks over, he sees this guy sitting on the ground. His feet are so deformed and crippled. He never walked in his entire life. He's a grown adult, never taken one step. Paul looks at him and sees that God wants to heal this guy. He says to him, "Stand up." And the dude stands up and starts walking around. Now, I want you to just think, if that was you, what would be going through your mind? Boom, right? I mean, like, boom. God is good. Jesus is awesome. He's the man. That's awesome. I just prayed for a dude, never walked. Now he's walking all around, no problem. Jesus can do anything, right? I mean, honestly, if you just said, look at the dude, never walked, said, stand up, and the dude just, you're not like, oh, Lord, Father, God of heaven, would you, no. You just, hey, stand up. The guy immediately stood to his feet and started walking around. I would be so on cloud 9. I would be like, dude, I am about to preach for like the next 6 hours here because, this is just amazing, right? Look how powerful God is. Look how good God is. If you were there, you would think, oh my gosh, that is amazing. What a miraculous, incredible God we serve. This story's going to get really weird, though. It's going to take a weird turn. You ready for it? Verse 11. Then the crowd saw what Paul had done. They shouted in their local dialect, "These men are gods in human form." The crowd is losing their minds, right? You got to remember, they're talking to pagans. These aren't Christians who've, raised their whole life on knowing the Bible. They don't know any of that. These guys are guys who worship all kinds of pagan gods and the Greek gods. You guys remember like Zeus and Hades and like all those kinds of Greek gods you might have heard about in like Greek mythology? They think those gods are real and they worship them. And they think, oh my gosh, Paul and Barnabas, these dudes are gods walking around like people. Because nobody could do that except for God. They decided that Barnabas was the Greek god Zeus and that Paul was Hermes since he was the chief speaker. Now, the temple of Zeus was located just outside the town. Remember, these guys are pagans. They're worshiping Zeus already to have a temple for him. So the priests of the temple and the crowd brought bulls and wreaths of flowers to the town gates, and they prepared to offer sacrifices to the apostles. They can't believe that this guy they've known their entire life, who they know is crippled, who they know is deformed, just literally in 1 second got up, stood up, and is now walking around, is totally healed. And so they started to try to worship Paul and Barnabas. And they started to bring out all these animals, and they're going to try to make sacrifices to it, right? So Paul and Barnabas went from like, hallelujah, to like, no. Don't do that, right? Look what they say. It says, in verse 14, but when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard what was happening, they tore their clothing in dismay and ran out among the people shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this?" You have to understand, tearing your clothing in the Old Testament is like, ah! Like when somebody dies or you're mourning or something's really messed up, that's one of the ways that they mourn. Friends, why are you doing this? We are merely human beings, just like you. We have come to bring you the good news that you should turn from these worthless things. This temple to Zeus, this temple to Hermes, these are worthless. You're worshiping gods that are pagan and are not real. We've come to tell you about the one true living God. These are worthless things, and turn to the living God who made heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them. In the past, he permitted all the nations to go their own ways, but he never left them without evidence of himself and his goodness. For instance, he sends you rain and good crops and gives you food and joyful hearts. But as even with these words, Paul and Barnabas could scarcely restrain the people from sacrificing to them. Paul and Barnabas are freaked out. This is the opposite of what they wanted. They know what a great sin it is to worship something other than God. It's idolatry, and they don't want any part of it. So he said, look, no, we're just like you, flesh and bone humans. We're not gods. We're not special. We're just like you are. We just come to tell you about the one who truly is God, the one who truly is strong. It's not me who healed this guy's feet. It's the living God of heaven. And I want to come and testify of who he is and tell you about him. Now, this story is going to take another super weird turn. Just as they're finishing, then some Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowds over to their side, and they stoned Paul and dragged him out of town thinking he was dead. This story has lots of twists and turns in it. Chris, I'm going to need your help with that. I want to give you guys an illustration here, but in one sentence it says these Jews showed up from Antioch, and then in one sentence, all it says is they turned the crowd against him, and it says they stoned Paul and dragged him out of town. Chris, you can go ahead and bring that stuff over. They stoned Paul and dragged him out of town thinking he was dead. Okay, here's what happens. Paul and Barnabas preaching the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ to people who had never heard it before. Thanks, bro. It's right in the middle. Yeah, it's not really in the middle. There you go. Okay, thank you. All right. Preaching the good news. And then they testify of God's power and strength by healing this guy right there in their midst, right? And so if you're Paul and Barnabas, you're like, hallelujah, okay? I mean, you're like on cloud nine. Then you find out these people are now so freaked out, they're trying to worship you as a god, and they're trying to, the thing that you're doing is kind of creating this sinful reaction in people. And she's like, no, wait, we're not gods. We're just men just like you. And finally, as you're beginning to be able to convince them that you're men just like you, these other dudes show up from the town you were just in that had tried to stone you before, and they start telling people, no, these guys are wicked, these guys are evil, you guys should kill these guys. And so this crowd that's like, I'm listening. Oh my gosh, let's worship these guys. Never mind, let's kill these guys, right? The story, The story flips like that. And here's what you don't understand. When I was growing up, I always thought of stoning somebody as like when little kids throw rocks at people, like this rock right here. Like if I threw this rock at you and hit you with it, it would hurt. It would hurt. And you'd probably go to the nurse and then get cleaned up and then go call the cops and be like, my youth pastor is throwing rocks at me. Can you come arrest him? And they would come here and if they were, if they did their job well, they would arrest me, right? That's not what stoning is. This is what you got to understand. I want to give you sort of a decent illustration of what stoning is. So stoning works like this. In fact, in the Old Testament, they would, the way they were prescribed to kill people was to stone people to death. So the way, a lot of the parts of the Middle East and Turkey and where these guys are at in Greece, there's a lot of rocks around, okay? So you're not looking for rocks all the time. You can just find them all over the place. So stoning works like this. You take a rock, something like this, okay, about this size, that is big, but you could throw hard, okay? And so you decide you want to kill somebody, this is the way you're going to do it. I mean, this is their like electric chair, okay? You take a rock like this, and you get a bunch of other people with you, and you just run and you throw it at somebody, right? Until if I win, if you were up here and I went, and David, just stand up for 1 second. If I took this rock and I just like hucked it as hard as I can at David, it would hurt him. And if he had like 5 or 6 other rocks like this being thrown at him, he would fall down on the ground, right? He's down on the ground. He's in bad pain. He's probably break some bones, some ribs or something like that. Maybe break your skull, something like that. And then he'd fall down and he'd be like, I'm hurt really bad. And I'd say, that's what I wanted. The stoning's not over. And then I go and I find a good rock, like a bigger rock like this, a heavy rock. He's laying on the ground. I think, I'm going to kill you, David. And then I, and I, like, if you imagine this is just somebody's head, right? And then we get a bunch more rocks, right? And now listen. Shh, sit down. Sit down. Here's what I want you to think about, what I want you to understand. Give me respect. Give me respect. You don't stone somebody that you dislike. You don't stone somebody you want to hurt. You stone somebody that you want to kill. It is a very traumatic, very painful, very scary, terrifying way to die. It's not something you do to be nice to somebody or whatever, right? And so it just says it in one sentence, but if you use your imagination to think about this, Paul preaching the gospel, sharing the good news, heals somebody, and the next minute he's being stoned and killed by these rocks. And so they do this to him. They get enough people together and they attack him with these rocks, they drop him on him, and they believe he's dead. Now, you have to understand, this is not, these aren't people who've never seen a dead body before. These are people who know what a dead person looks like. And so Paul, he wasn't dead, but we just have to understand he was very, very, very close to death, okay? And so they go out, and they drag him outside of town, and they just leave him there, his dead body. But it says as believers gathered around him, he got up and went back into the town. The next day he left with Barnabas for Derbe. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Paul is serving God, and this is what he gets for it. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was out there preaching and sharing the gospel with people, and the thanks I got was getting stoned and getting gigantic rocks. I mean, Paul got up, but you got to imagine he had broken bones. He was probably had a concussion. He's probably throwing up. He was probably jacked up and needed to convalesce for several months after this. Instead, the disciples gathered around, the other people who had been converted to Christianity, they helped him up, and they took him to the next town, him and Barnabas, to a town called Derbe. Now, this is why you have to read your Bible very, very, very carefully. Because what you're going to find out in this next sentence, if you're not careful, you're not thoughtful, you'd miss it completely. It says, and after preaching the good news in Derbe and making many disciples, Paul and Barnabas go to Derbe for the next several months. They preach the gospel, they preach the good news, they make many disciples, they start churches there. After preaching the good news in Derbe and making many disciples, Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, and Pisidia. Okay. What'd they do? They went back to the same place where they had been stoned just a few months earlier. What in God's green earth would possess Paul and Barnabas to go back to such a God-forsaken place as people who would treat them that way and would beat on them that way? Is your hand up back there? No? Just scratching your head? What would possess them to go back? In the beanie. God. That's good. A lot of times in church, you can throw out the answer God, and there's a good chance you'll be right. Sort of. What was Paul doing there in the first place? Put your hands down. Paul was called by God to preach the good news. God, in fact, chose Paul. This is his first missionary journey. It won't be his last. This might be one of the first times he's ever been beaten and hurt. It won't be his last. Paul loved God so much that God called him to go share the gospel with people, and he was willing to do it no matter what. Now, here's what I want you to say. Look, this wasn't a one-time thing for Paul. In fact, in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, 23-27, Paul's talking. He says, "Are they servants of Christ? I know I sound like a madman, but I've served him far more." What Paul's about to do, the reason he's saying, I sound like a madman, is because he's about to start boasting. He's about to start bragging, and he's not doing it because he wants attention or for the normal reason we brag, but he's saying, look, let me explain to you something about my life. Something about what I've done in my following of Jesus. Let me explain that to you. And normally I wouldn't, but for these specific people, the Corinthians, they need to hear it. He says, "I have worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times, the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 40 lashes was a death penalty. This is where they beat you until you were almost dead. And they let you come back to life. If you remember in the Passion of Christ, this is what they did to Jesus. They scourged him, and they whipped him with these, they have this whip with these leather straps that come off of it. In the strap, they have pieces of bone and metal. And it tears the flesh off your back. And so 39 lashes was 40 lashes was a death penalty. 39 lashes meant they beat you within an inch of your life. 5 times that happened to the Apostle Paul. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Talking about this time. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I've faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I've faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I've faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and have gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. To follow Jesus for the Apostle Paul meant sacrificing everything to follow him. Meant sacrificing everything to go and share the gospel with people who didn't know about Jesus, who needed to hear the good news. You know, if we're going to make a bumper sticker or a sweatshirt that says Eddie would go, we should definitely have one that says Paul would go. Because the Apostle Paul, when he saw trouble, when it required risk, he was willing to take a step of faith. He was willing to go out and put himself out there and risk everything. And he proved it over and over and over again. And so as much as I admire Eddie, I admire the Apostle Paul so much more. It makes you wonder, where did Paul get this kind of courage from? Where did he get this attitude of just, I'm willing to risk everything from? I want to tell you, he learned it from Jesus. Look at John 15, 12 through 14. It says, "This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way that I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command." You know what Jesus is saying? The greatest love there is when you lay down your life for your friends. And then Jesus went on to demonstrate it, right? Jesus gave up his life for us. He gave up his life for you and for me. The reason he went to the cross is because he loved you. Because he cared so much about redeeming you that he's willing to sacrifice and give up everything. And really, all Paul's doing is he's just following the example of Jesus. Jesus was willing to risk everything. Paul was willing to risk everything. Look what it says in Ephesians 5, 1 through 2. This is Paul writing. He says, imitate God in everything you do, because you're his dear children. Are you his son? Are you his daughter? Are you born again? Do you belong to God? Because if you said, it says, live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. It's saying Jesus was willing to sacrifice and lay down everything for you, and now you go imitate him and do the same. So the Apostle Paul just took him up on his word. God, your word says to imitate you, to be willing to live my life for you, and so I'll do it. You know, Jesus didn't love you in just like words only. He didn't just say nice things about you or comfort you when you're sick or something. Like Jesus didn't just, it's not a surface kind of love that he's loved you with. It's the deepest and most profound love. A love so strong that it compelled him to leave heaven. We just celebrated Christmas. To leave heaven, to be born as a baby, to humble himself, not to come to earth to be served, but to come to earth to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus was willing to do that for you. He looked into the world, he saw us, and he saw that we needed help, and he put everything on the line to rescue us. It cost him everything to save us, even death on the cross. And so as long as we're handing out bumper stickers, we're going to have one that says Eddie would go, and definitely think we should have one that says Paul would go. The ultimate one that we should have is that Jesus would go. Because Jesus did go. Jesus did go. He went to the ultimate length to rescue you. Listen, even I'm talking to 200 people here, but I want you to understand this is personal for each one of you. Jesus went not for just everybody in this room. He went for you. He went for you. He went for you. He went for you. He went to the cross for you. This is the most personal thing that I could try to get into your brain. He loved you, specifically you, so much. He went to the cross for you, and then he died for you, and then he was beaten and mocked and scourged and whipped for you because he loves you, because he needed to help you, because he wanted to rescue you. And so he went, and he laid down his life for you. And then he says this, talking about if Eddie would go, Paul would go, certainly Jesus would go. Look what it says in Mark 16:15. Let's be up on the screen behind me. It says, go. Actually, this one won't be on screen. Mark 16:15, go into all the world and preach the gospel to everyone. Jesus then commands us, and he says to us, I want you to do what I do. I want you to go. I want you to go. I want you to go into all the world and make disciples of all the nations. I want you to go on missions trips. I want you to go places. I want you to go to your next door neighbor. I want you to go to your school. I want you to go to your family. I want you to go to your friends. And I want you to be a light to them about God's love and faithfulness. I want you to share with them about who Jesus is, about his incredible love, that he wants to make you a daughter. He wants to make you a son. And I want you to go and I want you to tell people about that. The Apostle Paul did it. He went, and he suffered because of it. And he had such an amazing life. And the reason many of us are Christians today is because the Apostle Paul went. Because he went and shared the gospel with somebody, who 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 shared the gospel with you. They say that the gospel is always one generation away from extinction. You weren't born a Christian. You might have been born into a Christian family, but you weren't born a Christian. You have to confess and believe on Jesus for yourself. It doesn't matter if your parents are. It doesn't matter if you're in the room full of Christians. You have to do it. But I just want to talk the last little bit. I just want to talk about what does it mean to go? Because what I don't necessarily mean is I don't want you to all go straight from home from here and find out I'm going to buy a ticket to Zimbabwe and I'm just going to get out, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to learn Swahili and I'm going to start sharing the gospel with people. That's not really what I mean. Even though that'd be cool if you got your parents' permission. I'd be cool with that. And someday I hope that some of you do. But what does it mean to go? What does it take to go? Matthew 16:24 and 25 says this, Then Jesus said to his disciples, If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. You got to give it up. If anybody, listen, if anybody wants to be my disciple, you got to give up your own way. You got to take up your cross and you got to follow me. And then he says something really crazy. He says, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give your life for my sake, if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Paul's life stands as kind of this amazing life, but the truth is, it really shouldn't be all that special. In fact, that should be the normal Christian life. I don't mean necessarily that all of us need to have some really terrible, horrible things happen to us, but the normal Christian life should be a Christian who's willing to surrender everything and go and follow him. Because that's what Jesus said. He says, you can't be my disciple unless you're willing to surrender everything. Unless you're willing to love me more than you love your friends, you can't be my disciple. Look, unless you're willing to love me even more than you love your family, certainly more than you love your PlayStation, your Xbox, certainly more than you love Facebook or Instagram, if you don't love me more than those things, you cannot be my disciple. If you try to hang on to your life, if you try to make it what you want it to be, if you try to hold on to everything really tight, you're going to lose it. It's all going to go away. You're not going to get it. But the secret in God's kingdom, how to find your life, when it says life, Jesus said, I came to give life and life abundant. I came to give amazing life, good life. I was talking to somebody about this tonight, that your life could be so radically, abundantly, amazingly good. But the way it happens is not how you think. It's not by going and working real hard and making a bunch of money and buying whatever you want. It's not about becoming super popular and famous and having all kinds of, that's not what it is. The way you have a great, amazing, abundant life is you lose your life for God's sake, and that's how you find it. You say, God, let my life be whatever it is you want it to be. It means surrendering everything to him. The human video we watched tonight, and then he said, I'm all in. That's the only way to be a Christian. I want to shoot you straight. I want you to live your whole life in church and just kind of think Christianity is about doing good things or being a good person. That's not it. It's not about being sweet old ladies and old men. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to surrender everything in radical obedience to Jesus and say, God, have your way in my life. I'm all in. I'm all in, Jesus, because I love you. Because you are better than anything else. Paul was willing to go back to Lystra and Iconium, the same place where they stoned him to death almost, because he loved those people and he wanted to share the gospel with them. And as long as you have something else sitting on the throne of your heart, you're never really going to be able to be all in with Jesus. And so we've been up here, Jeremy and John and Chris, Chris Bruner, Chris Alley, and Sabrina, they all had great messages. I've been talking to your leaders about family times, and there's some great Bible studies in there, and there's some good stuff. Back home, Friday nights, we have some great Bible studies. But look, it all really comes down to this. Are you willing to surrender everything to Jesus? It's worth it. It's hard, but it's worth it. He's better. Let me invite the band up here. Are you willing to give up everything to follow Jesus? The Christian life is not a safe life. It's not for weak people. I remember when I came to this camp in junior high, right over there at Creekside, and I remember this guy giving a message, and he said, and this is something I've heard several times since then, but he said, you know how you spell faith? R-I-S-K. And I was like, no, you spell it F-A-I-T-H. Right, that wasn't his point, though, right? His point was the way you spell faith, to really live for Jesus, you're going to have to risk something. You can't really follow God unless you're willing to risk. And so what Jesus is saying to you is, will you lay down your life for me? You know, our prayer is that you guys would do so much more than anything we've ever done. Our prayer, every leader in here, you know what we want? We want there to be pastors and missionaries and evangelists and worship leaders and prayer leaders and ministry heads in this room. People that in your life, you're going to go out and just live recklessly for God and make an impact in His kingdom. I just want to tell you tonight that it's possible for you, but the only way it's possible is if you lay down your own life and you say, God, I care more about you than I care about even what I want for my own life. And so, listen, that's an easy thing to say and a hard thing to do. But just the reality is, it starts with making a decision. Everything in life starts with making a decision. You know, the hard thing about being a pastor, a youth pastor, is that I've seen so many people over the years respond to God in kind of a half-hearted way. I know I should, or, you know, like they kind of don't take it that serious, and they respond to God in whatever, but really doesn't take root. It's not real to them. And you know what's weird about us as leaders? We can't really tell from the outside. Because sometimes I thought, like, I don't think that's legit. And then that person lived for Jesus in radical ways, and I was so surprised and amazed at what God did with their lives. And other people I thought, oh yeah, like this person's really loving Jesus, but you know, it wasn't really deep. It wasn't really rooted in them. And it just kind of like died off after a while. And so really, I can't tell from the outside, but you might have some idea as you look into your heart tonight. And I just want to say this. We're going to have a time to respond to God, but I do not want you to respond to God in some kind of a half-hearted way. You would be worse off if you came forward and said, God, I am all in with you. God, I'm willing to surrender and lay down my own life in order to follow you. But if you don't really deep down mean it, you will be worse off for coming forward tonight. It would be better for you if you stayed in your seat. I want to encourage you as hard as I can to stay in your seat tonight. Because what God is after is people who really are willing to say, God, I surrender my life to you. I will live for you. Even if it costs me my life, even if it costs me my friends, even if I have to be alone for a while, even if it's going to be a struggle or a fight in some way in my life, Lord, I am willing to follow you no matter what. So bow your heads.